All right, I'm tired of talking about this series. Let's talk about C9 versus TL for a bit before we get Dylan Falco on to talk about LEC and Schalke, because it was a good dive into some of these issues. But these are the teams that I thought C9 would win this series. I thought their victory was pretty convincing overall. I think a lot of people were saying, okay, Team Liquid, they've got the top gap with Alphari. Turns out Fudge was extremely competitive over the course of this series. He's a player who has grown, I think, substantially since the lock-in tournament. From your top lane expertise, how would you say that Fudge has improved as a player over the course of the split?
Well, I think everybody at the start thought Fudge was not so great, right? But, and even I put, I think I put Fudge at 8th in the tier list in the middle of the split, because from what I saw from Fudge, and I also took a little bit of my own experience because I've laned versus many of these players, right? In LCS or Academy. And so I took that and I compared it to the other players, and I thought, okay, C9 has been sticking Fudge on. When I did that tier list, he had played 4 games of Gragas in a row and a Karma game. So it's just, okay, maybe for me, I just couldn't tell how good Fudge was because he was playing this weak side so often. But the thing is, when he was playing that weak side, he didn't really get that much jungle proximity either, and he had the lowest deaths in the league. And while stats don't mean everything, I do think that speaks a lot to someone who is playing with a team that acknowledges that they're usually not going to be playing around him. And the fact that he's not dying at all and just doing his role is probably the best thing he could have done for C9 at the time. That being said, against the series against TL, everybody thought it was just going to be an Alphari gap, right? It was just going to be an absolute stomp. But Fudge coming from that kind of weak side player to coming into the series and putting up a very good fight against Alphari and even getting ahead in some of the matchups, like, it speaks volumes of how good a player can get from playing on the best team, I think. I think Fudge already was a talented player, and he's young, and he has a long future ahead of him in terms of his career. But I think you could put a lot of top laners in Fudge's position, and the fact that he's surrounded by some of the best players in the region, and some of the best players coming from other regions, it is just a spot. That's the real hyperbolic time chamber, is you get so much better so fast that people forget about how, okay you were before, and you just become one of the best top laners in the entire region.
I think there's several things, because I actually did watch a lot of Fudge's and Cloud9 Academy's games last year, and I could tell from those games that he was better than he was performing in the lock-in tournament. Right. So my conclusion was either he had fallen off, which I thought was unlikely knowing him, and his kind of dedication to practice, or that he was just integrating into this new roster and maybe nervous about participating in the LCS and would improve over time, which I thought was probably the more likely option, because I had seen, pretty good skill on this guy overall, even in Academy. And I think that, the other factor too is that not only are there these excellent players surrounding him, like you're talking about, and certainly having a leader helping you shot call like Perkz on the team is absolutely enormous, but also one thing that is kind of flown under the radar has been that Cloud9 really invested in positional coaches this year.
One of the biggest coaching staffs in the entire West, as far as I know.
Vagar V2, Max Waldo, Mithy, and then Rainover now as the head coach. But from the conversations that I've had, and what I've heard said has been that they have focused a lot, their positional coaches, on helping his laning phase, which has been a continuous source of improvement. So I think you can see the value of having some of these high-level players who may not be good enough to go pro, but are good enough to kind of understand the micro of a laning phase and be able to kind of do the research at a high level and then help the player directly with that without taking away the head coach's
just look how fucking experienced your supportive positions are as well. Rainover and Mithy are your fucking jungle and support positional coach. Like, enough said.
Well, it seems like they have one for every lane, right? And so when you are that kind of new player coming into the LCS, and I'm assuming that how it would work is after every single game, you're having like a little one-on-one with your positional coach. How could your improvement not be like dramatic, right? Every single lane phase you're being told about, because they get to see the game on a wider screen, right, with no fog and everything. So it will become ingrained to you after every game. They speak to you about the matchup and talk to you about the waves and everything like that, that eventually it will just become second nature to you. And that's just one of the biggest reasons why you can go from.
I mean, not only that, but these guys are there watching you play solo queue and then going and digging around in a bunch of OPGG replays of some of the best top laners in the world to research specific matchups. And then they just come back to you with the information.
Well, and
that sounds great.
One big thing I want to talk about is like, these are players who are, GM or challenger players themselves.
Yes,
of these
exactly.
coaches. And I think that is the future of coaching around the entire world, is going to be, maybe not retired players per se, but players who or League of Legends players who have been challenger or GM. I think that could be debatable, because you could be a lower ranked player and still know a lot about the game macro wise. But when it comes to positional coaching like that, I feel like the future of League of Legends will that a lot of these teams will have positional coaches in each lane.
I agree.
Yeah, that are always also challenger.
I mean, I'm the example of the opposite, right? Where, there's two approaches you can do. I took the kind of film study approach and prioritizing my knowledge on team comps and the macro game. But I will be the first to tell you at all phases of my career that I was not an expert on a lot of, nuances of lane matchups, right? I would take the information that was given to me by the pros or the information I'd gained from watching a lot of games, right? But for the most part, we didn't have Pro View back in the day when I was coaching. So my ability to, or even replays. So my ability to do that research was limited. But I agree now that I think there's a whole new separate class of coaching that can be opened up for the ex-pro players, or at least like Masters Plus players that may not have the mechanics, but at least have the knowledge and ability to do this research to complement, coaches that are very familiar with the overall macro game. Or like researching kind of tendencies of a specific opponent when it comes to compositions, strength of play. But I think it's cool to see that Cloud9 really pushing the envelope of what you can do when it comes to those kind of positional coaches and having different kinds of coaches on the staff overall, right? Because I think it's great. And also, I mean, it helps that you kind of have Perkz in the server, who basically is a coach in the game with you. He reminds me, we were talking about the NFL, Thorin and I, before we started this podcast. He reminds me of Peyton Manning in a lot of ways, where why it was unfair to play against Peyton Manning was that he was like an offensive coordinator on the field, right? Calling the shots. And he could change things at the last second, which an offensive coordinator can't do. So for me, Perkz just has this awareness, and not only that, but he has the attitude to like boost his teammates up. This is why he is so unique and incredibly valuable. So you combine these factors together.
We can just tie this into the conversation earlier. Like we were talking about like the macro problems, right? Well, look at the two teams that we're left with realistically, who are the best two in NA, right? Cloud9 has Perkz, who basically is probably the best player ever for that, maybe being like both like a good player in the game and like a calling presence. Then you add in who's his rival team. It's where Core JJ has just been doing the same shit for the last like 3 years at this point. So like those players, it's not just like they can be MVPs in their role. They're actually way more important for the other shit. Like their role as a captain is like worth its weight in gold. Just look how good their teams get when they play.
Yeah, and if played with someone like Arrow when I was on Optic, Arrow was really big about that too. Is that if by chance, if our coaches miss something, you can always expect someone like Arrow to pick up on it during the review, which is what I'd assume with Perkz and Core JJ too. They can be talking about something, and let's say the coaching staff misses an important point. They will be the ones to bring that up and get the conversation going. So it's always good to have that kind of analytical player on the team that just also happens to be the best in their role, which is a nice thing to have.
You know why that is, though?
Why?
It's actually obvious, because it's quite common practice to use an arrow to point to some information that you'd like people to check out. Video games, there you go. Straight fire. Whatever, keep going.
Yeah,
that was the real point, believe it or not.
And having that makes review much more productive, because like, let's say you don't have all the points that maybe you miss some things. Like, no, more often than not, you will be spending too much time on a single point, and God knows that sometimes review in North America can go on and on and on, and too long of a review weighs heavy on a player.
Oh yeah, your eyes just glaze over. After
you're like just ready for it to end. But when you have someone who can kind of be a voice too and say, okay, next point, and get onto equally similar, like a more important point or another problem that the team could fix, I think that's a really big help. And that's why having such a good staff, like for C9 example, they have so many people that can be bringing out these points that can even dish them out, and probably pretty quickly. They don't have to spend 15-20 minutes on each point. They can bang them out and then go on to the next game.
Or you just don't bring up those individual laning points with the entire group, and you just break off afterwards and work with those players individually, as opposed to wasting everybody's time, which is very common in these VOD reviews, where it's let's talk about the top lane matchup, and everybody else is like,
Yeah, well, the worst, I can tell you, the worst is like, let's say you fucked up something mechanically, and your coach goes, but you shouldn't have done this here. But like, no shit. You spend like the next 10 minutes going over, maybe I should have eat here when you should have queued, or you should have lasted. It's awful when that becomes the case, and I have no doubt that still happens sometimes. But I'm hoping that kind of coaching will go away entirely, and in favor of these branching off to positional coaching kind of style later.
So let's talk about this series in particular, because I don't think anybody was wow. Like it was okay. Like it was a pretty good series overall, but I don't think anybody was really wowed by the level that either of these teams have shown. That said, you and I and Thorin were talking during the break and saying like, well, I said the thing that I appreciate about C9 and Team Liquid is like, they don't have the best practice opponents here, but they're players on an individual level. Whoever goes to MSI, I'm confident that with better practice for a little bit, they will actually improve and be competitive. Whereas, I don't think TSM or, 100 Thieves would be able to show that. It's just the individual talent on these teams is high. So I'm not so worried about that, once they go over to Iceland. But one thing that was very weird about this series, and I'm curious if you have any insight on it, was the Sylas blind picking and Sylas priority that developed here, which seems like, sometimes in a best of 5, you get into like a weird meta between two teams. And it just felt like we were like in this very strange, like Sylas rabbit hole that I didn't really understand why this was happening or what the purpose of doing it was.
I think a lot of the times, at least in my experience with Sylas blind picking, it just entirely depends on the enemy comp. You can see a whole bunch of ults that you want on Sylas, and then so it's like, all right, give me the champion I can play into any matchup. So maybe that was the logic.
Sure. I mean, at least in game 2, when C9 was on red side, when you see Hecarim, Seraphine, Gangplank, you're feeling pretty good about Sylas.
Yeah,
right?
So
you're feeling pretty good.
Sylas already is like a good champion, and I'm not too familiar with his matchups in mid lane, only kind of top lane. But I know mid laners I played with previously, they'll see certain ultimates, like they'll see an Alistar on the enemy team. It's like, give me Sylas, because the Alistar ult is just so good, right? And I think a lot of, not that it happened that series, but it'll be the same. Like if you see a Malphite ultimate, it's like, oh my god, give me Sylas no matter what. So
even in this series though, like the actual first game, I actually found the other side of that what's quite weird. I don't claim to be like a draft expert, but when I was watching that, I was like, why the fuck would he pick the Ahri into the Sylas? Like, isn't that Sylas then just a better version of Ahri? Like, at the moment, if people don't know at the moment, right, Ahri is basically like a skill matchup pick that people are picking because they think specifically they like know a matchup slightly better. So if you're doing that, you're already sort of trying to like ice skate uphill if you're Jensen. So like to me, he just started the series off as hard as possible, as far as I can tell. Like, I don't know why, because it's already a series where he was under a lot of pressure.
I find Ahri kind of suspect and niche right now, because I understand, the Everfrost strength on it and being able to reposition very quickly to get like big roots and make sure you land your charm. But I just don't see how Ahri does anything into the C9 composition. Like, you're never going to get an angle to engage on anyone that you would actually want to in this game, right? Like there's no way that Everfrost route is coming down on a valuable target.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they thought like it worked once, maybe it'll work again. I agree. I kind of think Ahri is a bad champion. Like fundamentally, the only reason Ahri is played is because Everfrost exists, right?
She is so.
And so, like, couldn't you just have done that with someone else? Build Everfrost on like another character and just be a better version of Ahri? Potentially, right?
Could have also run Seraphine mid lane, right?
Yeah. So she is essentially just an Everfrost delivery mechanism. That's all Ahri actually is.
And it's so weird to think that would become like a not a priority pick, but like, oh yeah, let's pick Ahri, when it's just you're saying, okay, yeah, let's pick mobility over Everfrost.
You know, on the other side of that, in terms of weird Everfrost champs, one thing that did develop in this series too was Everfrost Nidalee in the jungle for Blabber, and I actually really like that because if you if you get the chunk damage out with a spear, you can immediately leap in and then root the target to create a pick, which I thought was interesting and creative way to add potential additional engage to the team.
I wouldn't call it engage as much as it is like Everfrost was just a good item, right? Like it's another ability on your champion, really. And it's what it feels like when I play against it. It's like it denies so much opportunity because it has that kind of delay mechanism where it kind of comes out and you can still run into it. It's not an instant thing. And so because of that, it just adds an extra ability to your character that is just straight up either a massive slow or a root. And so I don't even think it's that good on Nidalee as much as it is what's better on Nidalee. Like you could build Leandries or Ludens or Moonstone.
I mean, I think it is good on Nidalee, though. That's the thing, is that, if you're running Nidalee and you're trying, like, the problem with running poke comps or with running Nidalee is following up on the damage that you have, right? But this instantly solves that problem in a way.
Yeah.
It makes your picks much more reliable.
I guess so, but usually when you're doing like these kind of long range picks with Nidalee, it's because of a setup from another champion. And like, at least when I'm playing the game and I'm playing against Nidalees, I'm never like, unless I'm already on, Nidalee's already on top of me, the Everfrost obviously is not doing. That's why I feel kind of weird when people build Everfrost on Zoe, because many of the times when Zoe is doing things to me, it's like from a pretty long range. And like, if I'm getting hit by Zoe E, like, then that's me getting fucked up and getting hit by the E. Same with Nidalee. Nidalee wouldn't have the opportunity to use Everfrost in me.
All right. So you're saying just dodge the skill shots, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, because what you think when I think Everfrost is like more a CC into an extra CC or something that you're already lower range. I guess in my head, it's that these champions have more of like long range utility. And that Everfrost just happens to be that good, or Everfrost just happens to be that much better than Ludens and Leandries.
All right, so let's end with you because we have to get on to Dylan. He's been waiting, but let's talk about kind of the next phase of these playoffs. We see Cloud9 going directly to the finals. Team Liquid's going to have to play 2 games potentially, or TSM's going to have to play 2 games. I say, it seems very unlikely that TSM is going to win given their performance and the fact that they've already lost to Liquid. And Liquid looked better against C9 than they did against TSM. So do you think Liquid's capable of pulling this out now that we've kind of seen this top lane matchup that was supposed to be TL's advantage? Because to me, it seems like
it means win the whole LCS, but not TSM. Win LCS.
Actually, I'm a little worried for TL because I think Tactical, and I think we can all agree, like Tactical has not looked as good as he has before. And I think that's a big problem. Well, let's say you beat TSM and now you're coming against Sven Vulcan, who, my God, Vulcan has been on fire the entire split. And I feel like Tactical's biggest problem has been getting caught out. And I think Vulcan's the best thing about him is finding the engages when someone is out of position. And so, and with Alphari kind of underperforming recently, I think, that being one of the main ways how they got ahead, they haven't really gotten that far ahead on bot lane ever since the lock-in tournament when Tactical Core JJ were doing all the 2v2 kills. I think TL are going to struggle even against TSM if that kind of play comes up, because let's say TSM all of a sudden starts drafting properly and they can actually get dragons in the early game. It's so funny to talk about this because all I can talk about is how is this team going to fuck up for the other team to get ahead, right? This is
the problem with doing analysis, like being a color commentator, and it always has been in NA, by the way. You can't analyze the game because you, as a color caster, look like a fucking idiot because the teams always mess up what you're supposed to do. So it makes you look bad. If you're casting the game, you're like, well, I don't know why they did that, right?
I'm trying to think. Because I just realized, stopped myself in my rant because I realized I wasn't talking about what good is going to come for the team to get them ahead. I'm thinking about how is X team going to fuck up and get the other team ahead. So,
and to TSM's credit, they were very good at getting those Barons, once the throw occurred, right?
And C9 seemed to have the least fuck ups, right? So that's why I think it'll be really hard for teams. it's TSM and TL. Well, they just fucked this up, so maybe they won't be the best.
Jesus. All right. Well, sounds like C9 is the early favorite here, given what we've already seen. But we'll have to wait till next weekend. I think it's going to be really hard for any team to go to in those back-to-back best of fives and beat C9. Right?
Agreed.
It's doing both of those games in the same weekend is pretty rough on the teams that are in the losers bracket for sure.